So we're in quite different roles. I've always thought that the roles that we choose, especially when we get higher up in organizations, is about the lens that we perceive the organization through. I'll give you an example. As you all know, a CFO sees an organization through the lens of cash flow. So they'll improve a business by rationalizing costs and funding future growth opportunities. A head of marketing sees an organization through their engagement, and they'll act to foster deep and meaningful relationships with both citizens and with customers. I'm a man of simple taste. I'll just look at what we can measure. And then there's you. Your ethos in an organization is that it's the people that make the business great. And that concept is beautiful. It's powerful. And most importantly, every good department head across different disciplines would agree that it's 100% true. And a lot of what you do is made up of qualitative or hard to measure things. My job up here is to take you through some of the things that we can measure from ADAPT's data. And Jim showed you the personas that we look at primarily. It's in the technology space. So we're going to examine the role of people in technology and how people and digital work together to form new ways of working. Sounds okay? All right, cool. Let's start with some of your colleagues' perceptions. Your heads of digital are increasing their focus towards the uptake of new technologies. And that speaks really well to change management, because it's as much about adopting the new as it is letting go of the sentimental and the old ways of working. Because of that, they're looking at increasing investments in training and upskilling, because it provides context to the end user. It lets them know why we're changing. It's that classic, what's in it for me? We have your Chief Information Security Officers, or CISOs for short. Their biggest business barrier is the lack of skills in their department. And when we talk to that business unit, we hear some really interesting things. We hear that they're operating in a very finite skills marketplace, that increasingly they're poaching talent from each other, that the journey from someone that's a new graduate to productive and autonomous in a role is a long and arduous journey. And then when people get into leadership roles, there's some devastating statistics about mental health and well-being for cybersecurity managers and directors. And I know a lot of us are here today because we care about the well-being of our employees and our colleagues. We see people in my camp, data leaders, and our biggest skill gap is not in our department. It's the limited end user skill base. Some of that's mathematical literacy, and some of it's the ability to use tools like dashboards when we democratize information. Also, there's an inconsistent culture. So different departments can vary significantly in an organization about how they value information. I will say why I have this slide up that it's really easy for myself and my team to do. Show whoever we're talking to in the leadership layer ways that they can add value across different colleagues. And that's because at a high level, we're all focused towards similar things. This slide's a little bit busy, so let's zone in on a couple of these business priorities across personas. We have improving operational effectiveness, which is not just about running lean. It's about also implementing things like automation to free people up from the mundane, that improves employee experience and improves our ability to retain our top talent. We have a high focus on being secure and trusted. And we've all seen in the past 12 months that organizations that had the inability to secure personal data, they've had devastating impacts on brand damage and customer trust. So that board level focus has reverberated across the entire executive layer. You now see people like the digital leader in the middle, where it's their top priority. Normally, it's something like experience expectations, emerging technologies, digitization of workflow. It just shows that sometimes we pivot a bit too hard to things that happen externally, and it ruins the longer-term strategic vision of what we should be working on. We see people harnessing data to drive decision-making, and you're never 100% done on your data strategy because technology moves fast in this space and business goals change. So we've seen ways in which we can add value to different business units. We've seen alignment in mindsets. So it makes this next slide a bit perplexing. When we ask about the biggest barriers to major initiatives, competing business priorities comes up consistently. We've got some other areas here like legacy and talent shortages that we'll address later in the presentation. Let's stay at that top level for a second. And I looked at this slide for a long time with my team about the questions that we want to ask of our data. And we realized that it tells us the what and the where. It doesn't tell us the why or the how. Let me explain that to you. We can see what is happening, a disconnect. We can see where it is happening, everywhere. But we don't know why. We don't have a root cause. We need a level deeper. So we showed you the statistic in the pre-event survey and asked you to tell us what is the root cause of this problem. And from your experience and with your expertise, you gave us a phenomenal list. I love this list. It's incredibly interesting. We start up the top with resource constraints, which is that general feeling that we don't have enough to deliver on our own outcomes, so how can we help other business units with theirs? The next two are actual resources. We have a lack of time for transformation initiatives, and we have departments competing for budget. So when you put those three together, it sounds like there's a bit of territorialism happening, where people are looking after their own function without seeing the bigger picture and uniting the organization. When I switch to the how people overcome it, we've had some qualitative information from case studies that are really interesting. Gold Coast Health used employee champions during their digital transformation. So nurses were involved in the design of the nursing application, the rollout of the nursing application. So when it came time to do adoption training, it was the people actually using the software that were promoting it and promoting the value behind it. With the last two on this area, lack of visibility across departments and lack of cross-functional teams, I would tell you the how behind this, but in about 15 minutes time, you've got Dom Price up. And Dom, I think you could probably cover one or two things about how Atlassian tackles that problem. One of the big things with how is different organizations overcome competing business priorities in different ways. So there's no silver bullet statistic that I can give you to solve it. It's about listening to other people with expertise and contextualizing what works for your organization. There is something that a lot of these high-performing organizations have in common, and that's that they have the right digital skills and mindsets to manage this changed landscape. And two critical metrics that we use at Adapt is the digital savviness of the leadership, which is the ability of the leadership to value digital solutions and see them as competitive advantage, and then the digital fitness of staff, which is every employee's ability to leverage tools to perform in their role. And when we plot it on a scatter plot with each dot representing a different organization, we can see that in Australia we vary significantly in our ability to foster digital skills and mindsets. We have a research paper that goes through what all these quadrants mean, but let's just focus on the top right-hand side. What do the people do that capture exponential value do differently? What do they get different? Well, generally they're better at linking behaviors to outcomes. And that makes incredible sense because when you increase the digitization and put emphasis on what you're measuring, you can then develop goals that are more realistic, they're clearer, measurable, and aspirational while still being achievable. Then we can have a look at the behaviors that we want to influence that increase that gauge for the goal, that move people further along the journey of achieving what they need to. We also see, particularly when those organizations have high levels of literacy, they're more likely to see emerging AI tools as effective in driving strategy in their organization. Things like deep learning and generative AI. And generative AI is widely talked about at the moment. And from me talking to a lot of CIOs, heads of digital, heads of data, their perspective on this, their feeling of this, can be summed up by two words: excitement and fear. excitement for the opportunity that it can bring. Things like not having to do job descriptions over a long period, having 90% of that work done, or email templates, or people being able to self-educate themselves. Fear in terms of breaching regulation, intellectual property, and their ethical obligations to the stakeholders in their organization. That being their employees, their customers, their board, the very organization itself. So HR is going to have a key role to play in developing the ethical frameworks to manage these sorts of tools. The jumping off point that we always want to consider with ethical AI is, if the machine thinks humanly, is it acting humanely? And one of the things that we do know with this as well is that technology moves fast. Legislation and regulation moves incredibly slowly. So we need to start to adopt things now that will help us drive the benefit of things like generative AI in our organizations. But whether it's generative AI, digital savviness, digital fitness, the idea of using technology to drive change in an organization is inevitably creating a digital culture. And when we asked you on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective are your organizations at doing this? You can see only 1% of you say that you're very confident or you're highly effective in your ability to create a digital culture. That's problematic in practice. It's also problematic in me showing you what that 1% does differently, because we don't have a big enough sample size. So I grouped the 4s and 5s together and the 1s and 2s together, and we can see that 21% of you are effective. And if we can get that percentage more up to that 35% next year, then we can start to focus on those 5s out of 5s, because that number will organically go up. But for the moment, we can see what those people with the 4s and 5s do better to push them along their journey. And when I take the most important variables and put them in a decision tree, this is what we see. I love decision trees. If you take a second to talk through them, they're really effective ways to see and visualize how things play out in the real world. We start on this side with the high digital fitness of employees. Generally, with a decision tree, your first variable is your most impactful one. So all those insights that I gave you before about how you build digital fitness in your organization, they are the most important thing for you in creating a digital culture. We then go up to the next strand, where we talk about, okay, your staff are fit. What's the incentives coming from the top? What's the leadership's ability to push digital skills in terms of the benefits, rewarding them? If it's not good, you drop out of the equation. If it is good, then you go to that last step where it talks about investments and continuing investments. So is digital literacy training a line item on your balance sheet that you spend to year on year? Because digital fitness is a bit like an asset, and every asset, if it's not maintained, it depreciates over time. So the outcomes of that are pretty self-explanatory. It's also, my personal trainer has a great saying. She says, it's better to go to the gym 1 hour a day for 5 days than it is to go for 5 hours on a Saturday. So it's about continual work. But why build a digital culture? What are the benefits for organizations? We can see organizations that are effective in building a digital culture are also effective at capturing value from their operations. And we've talked about this through the presentation, the ability to automate, the ability to measure, to create the right goals. Interestingly, organizations with digital cultures are better at capturing value from their customers and citizens. And there's two sides to that. Some of it is the ability to create digital channels and omni-channel experience and measure engagement. The other side of it is this statistical evidence that supports that improving employee experience will then improve customer experience. Because when you remove frictions from employees, customers can feel that through the interaction, We also have more time to finesse how we work with people outside the organization and structure our teams to be able to deliver customer-centric outcomes. So a couple of things that we talked about during this, just to wrap up. We talked about how collaboration is important. I showed you at the start the different ways that we can add value to different business units. Education is critical in an organization in being able to deliver on your business initiatives as well as retaining your top talent. We talked about those competing business priorities and how important it is to unite people across the organization. We also talked about the value of automation, not just in streamlining processes, but also in freeing people up from the mundane to be able to retain our top talent.